Hi. Hi. Did you have a good lunch? Yes. I have never been to a conference that had such a good lunch. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm the Vice President of Power Pack. Power Pack identifies champions in the political sphere from the local, state, and the congressional level. We cultivate, we find high potential leaders, we cultivate them, we raise money for them, and we push them out and say, lead. And we are at that moment where there's great potential for women's leadership. I'm very, very proud to have a conversation about how far we've come, and to really frame, because you either hear it's terrible and very difficult to be a woman, or it's great to be a woman in your professional life, in your personal life. And the answer is much more nuanced, as our experts are going to talk about. And so I'll introduce our panelists, but first just tell you just a really brief story. Yesterday in Oakland, downtown Oakland, there was a group of 30 identified young leaders as part of a training program they called values-based leadership. There were labor unions and there were community groups that came together, and they picked these high potentials. I fell into conversation with two young women in the corner, and one of them said, I'd like to be in Sacramento someday. These two are in their maybe mid-20s. I'd like to be a state senator. And I said, okay. And the other one says, I'd like to be in city council. I said, that's fantastic. So when is your campaign? We have to do a lot more to be prepared. Maybe 10, 15 years. What's going to happen to a 25-year-old in 10 or 15 years? They're going to have kids. Okay, so I go, listen, there's this group of people called Close the Gap Initiative that figured out there's not enough women that are representing our state in Sacramento, and they're making plans 16 years out. So the answer is not, you need to qualify yourself to have permission to get into the room. The answer is, you're already here. And so step into your proper level of leadership. Men do not have this problem. Right? They do not have this problem. So the good news is, both in the political and we'll hear in other areas of work, we can both be glad we have opportunity, assess where we are, and identify where we need to go. So I want to introduce our panelists. Kat Gordon, who's the founder of Maternal Instincts and the 3% Conference, an expert in marketing and portraying women. Noni Allwood, who's a senior fellow and vice president for the Center for Talent Innovation. Noni, say hi to the folks. And then Sharon Mears, who works at eBay and co-author of Getting to 50/50, How Working Parents Can Have It All. Okay, I didn't know they could, so give them a round of applause. Round of applause. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Okay, so I thought we'd start this conversation by asking, beginning with Noni, okay, yes, beginning with Noni to talk to us for a few minutes about their analysis from their perspective and area of expertise, where we stand as women, and then we'll kind of go down the line, and then we'll have a full conversation after that.
Thank you. The Center for Talent Innovation is a think tank based in New York, and our work is dedicated to understanding what are the barriers that women and other underrepresented groups find in fulfilling their ambition and their potential. We're not here to dictate that women should all be CEOs, but we're here to find out what is in the way between them and wanting to achieve what they want to do. There's a couple of things that, of course, the world today, if we do a lot of global research, the talent pool today is 10% is white male, and 90% of the world is not. And yet the power base of the world is defined, is held by this a very small percentage of leaders. What we find is, of course, after 20 years, and you've heard this through Sheryl Sandberg and through everybody else that you hear about, is that the representation of women in executive ranks has not changed basically for the last 20 years. It goes up a little bit. The Senate goes up into 18, down into 16. Partners in law firms, CEOs, and even the executive suite is populated mostly by men. And women are simply stuck in the layer that we call the marzipan layer, which is just right below, and we call it marzipan layer because it's a very rich, it's ambitious, talented, qualified women that are eager, and they have healthy doses of ambition. They're talking about their dreams, and yet they're going nowhere. And that's about 34% of that marzipan layer is women. And yet they stall. They just simply don't make it. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, our research on the careers of women in science, engineering, and technology, and our work on innovation indicates that women's ideas are not being heard. Women's ideas are 27% less likely than those of men to see the market. What this means is that we're heading towards an economy where women have the buying power. We're headed towards a she economy where women will be influencing. In fact, Boston Consulting Group indicates today that at a minimum, women's influence in buying decisions globally is 64%. In some industries like healthcare or financial services, it's even higher. But what that means is that if you have this incredible talent in your company that is female, that understands what women want to buy, and you're still not allowing their ideas to make it, what a huge loss. Because we women know how women buy. We have a unique set of problem-solving skills that will really position these companies to capture this market growth, but they're not. A couple of things that we found to be really essential for women where we can make a difference is how we manage our relationship capital. Because we tend to be very shy and very modest, and the people that we seek are perhaps not the relationships that we need to foster our ideas and advocate for our progression if that's what we really want. And then secondly is that there's this strong bias and lack of understanding on what this secret ingredient called executive presence is. Whatever you bring to the table when you're going to present that idea, when you're going to make the case for what you believe in, and also how people are going to perceive your leadership potential. So those are the two levers that I think we're focused, and we're trying to understand this. Of course, it's critical to understand that this varies by industry, by country, by sector, even by function. So unpacking what executive presence is has been a big part of our work.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to go next, Kat?
Sure. So I work in the advertising world, and even if none of you have ever worked in the advertising world, you will see 3,000 advertising messages today, and so will your children. And advertising actually is a force that teaches us or influences what we think, what we drive, how we vote, our health, all sorts of things, cultural drives. So as Noni said, female consumers have the majority of the buying power in this country. Yet in my field, advertising, only 3% of creative directors are women. And that's the job I do. And so for years, I watched this, and I really related to what Lisa Stone said earlier about how she just got fed up. And that's how I felt. I kept waiting for somebody to come forward and say, why are we leaving all of the decisions about how to motivate the consumer marketplace to men when it's an estrogen-driven marketplace? And so it was one of those slow dawning realizations that perhaps you are the person, you are the whistleblower. And of course, I went through all of those doubts and imposter syndrome about who am I to do this, and I'm a nobody. But I realized that in a weird way, sometimes you are the perfect person to be an agent of change because of where you stand in your life experience. So for me, for instance, not only had I been an advertising creative director, not only did I now own an ad agency specializing in marketing to women, so I really understood the power of women, but I also lived in Silicon Valley. So I would sit in with all these startups and see all these decisions made and all this money spent where the ideas weren't even that good. And yet there was this bravado amongst all these founders. And so slowly I realized I'm kind of the perfect person to blow this whistle because I'm not beholden to some big holding company. So what I want to say about the state of things is that I am amazed and heartened by how quickly the message that I put out there has taken off. I mean, someone said it was like I took a match and threw it into a kerosene tank. So what I see that is the accelerant that has been missing before now is social media. So this issue about the lack of women in advertising has been discussed on panels at other conferences for years, but it never got any traction. But the minute I started, the very first thing I did when I decided to do this was I set up a Twitter account. That was the very first thing I did, and I announced it at another conference, that I was going to have a conference called the 3% Conference. And all of a sudden, people were, following it and chiming in and wanting to participate. And I am shocked at the change I have seen in my industry. We will have our third event this fall, and all of the advertising awards, the Clio's, Cannes, for any of you that follow that, they used to have almost all male juries. So you're perpetuating this cycle again, that the people that are deciding which ad campaigns are good are men, and so they're more likely to gravitate towards work that they like, so it's likely authored by a man, and it's all supposed to motivate a woman. I mean, it's complete lunacy. So our community, and we all of a sudden had this big social media swell behind us, really took them to the mat when the Clio's announced their last juries. And they have changed and publicly declared that they will have a 50-50 gender split going forward, all of the award shows. It's amazing. So I feel like I'm so optimistic about how one person that's paying attention can have a dramatic and fast impact on the world. And so I hope that more women here that work in fields where female leadership is stalled in single digits, there's absolutely no reason why you cannot be the person who brings that issue to light and mobilizes others to make change. So I'm really hopeful.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to talk more about that. Should we, would you like to go, Sharon?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. So again, I'm Sharon Mears. I spent 16 years as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. And you might ask how I came to write the book. It wasn't what I planned to do. And I'll tell you a little story and then kind of how that informs my sense of how things have gone. So 10 years ago, I started speaking at Stanford Business School at a particular course. And I was a managing director at Goldman. I had this lovely setup that I got to commute to my job in New York from California. And I had 2 little kids and a working husband. So not totally unsurprising. The students in the class would raise their hands and ask some pretty probing questions. But they were really pretty deep, like, Sharon, how do you feel about the fact that someone else is raising your children? I was like, they are? Who is that? And even more profound, aren't you worried that you're ruining your husband's career, leaving him alone with those kids? And I'm like, well, they are a handful, but he's kind of clever, and they're his kids too. And I stopped and I said, wow, if this is what's knocking around in people's heads, that we're too polite to talk about it at cocktail parties and too scared to talk about it at work, but if this is really the fear in so many minds, no wonder there are more women at the top. And what are we going to do to change that? And so what I will say is 10 years ago, people weren't really talking about this in a granular, friendly, fact-based, co-ed way. And today we are, thanks to Sheryl Sandberg, thanks to great work like work that Noni and Kat and all of us are doing here, Wendy's great conference. But I think we all need to grab the microphone and talk more about it, both offering ideas and asking questions, because that's how it's going to change. So let me just talk briefly about the 4 kinds of conversations that I think make the biggest difference. These were the kinds of solutions that seem to predict working parents who were happy about doing both. First is get rid of guilt. If you go to any major university in this country, they will tell you all the big science says kids do equally well whether or not moms work outside the home. In fact, the data gets better all the time, actually saying there are lots of advantages to having 2 parents in the workforce. Let's say that comfortably, even to women who don't work, and encourage them back in, because it's good for all of us. Second, the research says that men are equally good parents, and that the children who do best in school are the kids who have more than one highly engaged adult in their lives. So getting men engaged matters a ton. So get rid of guilt. Second thing is a theme we need to be talking about is, how do we focus on what really matters at work so that we can get home and actually see our families from time to time. And it turns out, I grew up in both technology and before that banking, and I think what the major research out of the business schools is saying now is what I learned is that you need to be 24/7 in order to be successful is just utterly, utterly wrong. And every day I have to look at the mirror and say, you're wrong. That's not what, that's more time is not going to help this. So there's research out of places like HBS saying focused, structured teamwork matters dramatically more than hours at your desk. What Lisa Stone was talking about, metrics-driven management produces dramatically better outcomes and less wasted time. And if we know those things, you'll see things like there's a huge IBM study that said the happiest workers are not those who work part-time. Those are workers who are at the office or engaged in work, something like 50+ hours a week, and they feel perfectly comfortable going home for dinner at least most of the time. So again, having these conversations allows us to ask why not, and like how do we iterate to different kinds of solutions. The third thing we need to talk about is how do we help men play bigger roles at home so women are free to lead larger lives at work, because that's a huge part of it. And
yes,
all of you. How do we welcome men to the home team? Because as much as all of us talk about how we wish men would do more often, even I ask myself, am I really pushing my partner away by telling him he does something wrong? And it turns out, again, there's lots of research that says when men feel discouraged or told that their way is the wrong way, then when it feels like it is, when we tell men that their way is the wrong way, they stop trying. And on the other hand, when women believe men are equally competent as parents, those guys do a lot. So it is actually in the hands of women more than we think to convert guys and invite them onto the team. And things like pointing out men who have working wives and do their share at home actually earn as much as men who don't. There's lots of interesting economics data around that. It's in our book. There's also a lot of really interesting work from Catalyst and other places that say men who have working wives actually are free to do more with their careers. They can go back to school, they can change careers, they can build their own companies. That's exciting stuff. So, and last but not least, there's the stuff that Sheryl Sandberg gets fired upon all the time for saying, but there is, the big research says that divorce risk is cut in half when husbands and wives share work at home and also both earn money. And there is less broad evidence, but quite a bit, that there's more intimacy and more sex. So nothing bad about that.
There's nothing bad about more sex.
There is nothing bad about more sex. And last but not least, what makes all this possible, and the fourth thing I think we have to talk about is creating oasis of time for men and women to come together, to agree with our partners how we are going to really share control. Share control at the office, like what are the norms at work? Share control in our homes. Who picks up, who makes dinner, whose business trip needs to get canceled, who's meeting with their boss needs to take priority. Having the time, the oasis of weekly one-on-one, writing down agreements, nerdy things like that turn out to be as useful in your kitchen as they are in your office. So with that, I ask you all to share your ideas and keep these conversations going.
Good. Thank you. So I just have to ask a couple of questions because Sheryl Sandberg's name, she's like the person who's not here, invisible hand. Her name was evoked at least 7 times since I've been here. She thinks the solution, this is for you, Noni, she thinks a lot of the solution rests with us as individuals. But what we heard in the panel is industry, the way that it was, needed to change. There is some individual responsibility in working in partnership around family. But the work that you've done around executive presence and around sponsorship really takes it beyond the individual to how you operate in an environment. I was hoping you could expand on that.
Sure. I think that it's pretty important to know it's not about fixing the women. There's nothing wrong with us. So we're just fine, thank you. It's just that what happens, for example, when we ask the executive, so who do you sponsor? Who do you, when you pick the person whose ideas or whose career you're going to put your name behind, how did you decide that? And he said, well, they said, well, 120% performance, great track record, trustworthiness, ambition, all the goodies, all the good news. And then they said, and then there's this executive presence thing that telegraphs to me that this person has whatever it takes to lead. And when we examined that, the behaviors they were looking at were attributes of males. The pounding on the table, the looking in the eyes, the shoulders, the whole thing that we know, right? It's like, yeah. So, but the point here, and this was an important point made this morning by Wendy and Lisa, I think it was, or Allison, I don't remember. The thing is that we as women, as we're gaining influence, we're playing into those things and we're judging each other in the same way. So the chance here for us is that we're gaining position of influence is to change those rules so that we view ourselves and we view each other in different ways and we appreciate the leadership and flavors that may not come in the traditional male leadership flavor. So what we found also is that a lot of these relationships of power are done in the informal setting, which is usually forbidden for women because it's hard for us to go out for drinks after work, because it's hard for us to engage in these relationships because of the stigma that women suffer when they are being sponsored or being supported by a male leader. So even creating that, so there's a dimension that is the culture of corporations, there's a dimension that is the leaders of those corporations, and then there's the portion of the individual. So I'm going to say that it's not only us. We can do some things to learn what the code is, so we can play those rules, so we can advance, enhance our leadership, and then change the rules.
Yeah. So I want to just take it one step further. Can you learn this? Is
Absolutely.
it possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Where do you learn it? How do you model yourself? Because we're a room full, we want practical tips. I mean, where do we go?
So a couple of things. First of all, when it comes to our relationship capital, what usually happens, if I ask the room and I ask you if you have a sponsor, I'm going to gamble that about 72% of you are going to say yes. When I tell you exactly what a sponsor is supposed to do, that number is going to drop probably to around 23, 29%. That's usually what happens. Because we women tend to look for those relationships of power, and we don't, first of all, we think it's a game. If I do my job, and I do it right, that should be enough, right? The world is fair. It's not. Not when you're making it past a certain level. Meritocracy only serves the beginning of your career. And there we are wondering how come we gave better results and he got promoted. So the first thing is for us to understand that when we need to find out what our goals are. A sponsor is not going to tell us, you don't go to a, you need to have very clearly defined goals, what you want. And it doesn't have to be CEO. It could be an assignment in China. It could be learning finance. It could be presenting this idea that you're so attached about. So the first thing is to understand that we have to have our goals ready, and then make sure that we nourish those relationships in a way that is what's in it for my sponsor, because sponsorship is not mentorship. Sponsorship is a two-way street. You need to know what matters to your sponsor, and then you have to be able to deliver to that. And then you have to develop your executive presence so that this person sees you in a way that you are able to telegraph that leadership potential and the worth of your ideas.
I was going to, just ask you, Kat, what, in a male-dominated profession, do the rules change? Are there different ways that, tools that women should use in a male-dominated sphere?
I feel like I want to change that question to what is it that women have and are already exhibiting that just is undervalued? Because, like, for instance, in advertising, creating the work is half of it, and then the other half is selling the work, being persuasive and presenting. And I think where women are masterful, and it's not always recognized, is in reading the room and picking up the body language of the client, diffusing criticism, making people feel heard so they're more likely to buy what you're selling. And so I feel like the thing I tell the women that work in advertising is your femaleness is not a liability to be apologized for. It is an asset to be celebrated. And so I don't think we have to play by the men's rules anymore. I think we have to make everyone, men and women, understand the real business value of what we inherently have. That's my viewpoint.
I mean, it was clear from your conversation about how the 3% conference came to be that you decided to take on the industry as a whole and kind of lift up the covers and say, this is what's happening.
Right.
I think to get to the logical 50-50 conclusion, what are the other things that you're going to be looking at in the industry, other than those who decide on making the awards? What tools will be needed not only on your part, but among women in order to make that happen?
Right. So unlike science, technology, engineering, math, where we're trying to get girls interested in working in those fields, what I think is more criminal in my field is that women want to work in advertising, and they're graduating from portfolio centers in equal numbers, if not greater numbers than men. So they have the skills, they have the interest, they get the experience, and they lifestyle out right when they're most valuable. So the thing that is most critical for our crusade is finding out not how to recruit women into advertising, but how to retain them through the time where their lives get a little more complicated. And so the big thing, and sometimes I feel like I'm the only person in the room that sees something that seems so obvious to me, and advertising agencies seem to prize vampire hours. The person that works till 2 a.m. and is drinking Red Bull is the hero, and yet the woman that came in early and didn't take lunch and has to catch a train home is looked at as the slacker.
Yeah.
And I keep saying there's no proof that good creative thought happens under those situations, those circumstances. So we're prizing this thing that doesn't even connect to the product we create. So I just feel like I question the most basic tenets of how ad agencies work. They don't result in a more creative output. And by making us feel we have to work all night, we lose women, and women are our greatest asset to connecting to our clients' customers.
So is the solution for there to be more women CEOs?
Absolutely. In fact, I feel like you need to have leadership at the top that understands and makes this a priority. Yes, it should be women. It can also be men, but they have to be extremely overt about how important this is and that it's a business imperative. I've made it really clear. Earlier, the panel talked about the importance of metrics. This entire conversation I have always made as a business imperative. I have not made it about, it's not fair that there's not more women like me in this field. It's about, why would you not want to serve our clients better? And here are the numbers about female purchasing power, female social media usage, female early tech adoption, amassment of wealth amongst female consumers. It's lunacy from a business standpoint to not listen. So that's where I always come in, and then you have everyone nodding and caring, and then it doesn't matter their gender. Let's just get people in leadership that get that and will hire and promote based on those beliefs.
We're going to open up the conversation in just a minute. I wanted to give you a couple minutes to think about your questions, but then come back to you, Sharon. It's like the question of many, like if you talk to a millennial, of whom I'm not, but the younger, if you talk to younger women, they're very cynical about the ability to ascend to the highest levels of leadership within an organization and have a family and have it all. They saw their parents do it, their mothers do it in particular, unsuccessfully and painfully. Many of them were latchkey kids, so that's a reality. So what advice do you give to people when they're trying to figure out how to do the family and parent thing and pursue their job?
Absolutely, great question. So, I grew up in Washington, D.C., which I consider the working mom capital of the planet because, from the times of, FDR, women were employed by the federal government at the NIH. And while my mom did not work growing up, a lot of the moms of the girls who were my best friends did. And so it was never in my mind that somehow I would be doing my kids a favor by staying home because I saw all these incredible girls who did a fantastic, who did a fantastic, had fantastic relationships with their mothers and did not feel at all neglected. Now, I also have a stepmom who's 12 years older than I am. And even in that, just 12 years older, she really knocked herself out becoming a partner at a big DC law firm. And because there were not more women ahead of her, she really felt the need, and I think probably it was the reality, that she had to work harder than the men around her to get noticed. So I think one of the things that we have to crack is this idea that just because women before us had to do things a certain way, or men before us had to do certain things a certain way, that it must be so. And I'll tell a story which I'm working on as sort of a way to crack this. And then I'll point to one other piece of research. So when I went to college, when I was 17, the person I looked up to as the most productive mind was my dad. My dad's a psychoanalyst. He used to disappear after dinner off to his office with like a glass of scotch, because it was those kind of days, and his typewriter, and he would write great papers in the middle of the night and somehow appear at breakfast the next morning. So when I went to college, I thought, now that I'm drinking age, I can have scotch while I'm writing my papers, and my dad smokes, I can smoke too. This is excellent. So here I am being a left bank intellectual, being so productive at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I now look back and I'm like, oh my God, the headaches, the cancer risk, the whatever. Why, how could I have thought that? But again, think about this. So there's a great piece of research, Leslie Perlow, Harvard Business School, tons of work on how we misperceive what drives excellence at work. That if you go around, she's looked at lots of different teams producing the same thing, same piece of software, same consulting project, and every team believes that their path to excellence is the right one. We're all really good at being certain the way we're doing it is the right way to do it, but it turns out there's incredible diversity in how people address these things, and if you go and you look at the teams that are producing great output, but they have great teamwork, they have great metrics, they cover for each other. Those teams work shorter hours, get people home to their families, and produce, her latest research at Boston Consulting Group, dramatically better work than the people who are up at 3 in the morning. So
wow.
Interesting.
Let's talk about that.
Interesting. And speaking of let's talk about it, what questions do you have? And all I want to say is we all know the difference between a question and a speech. Don't make me call you out. But if you don't mind standing up and projecting so we all can hear, that would be fantastic.
I've heard a lot of people today talk about the hierarchy, getting to the top. And to me, that's a masculine paradigm, And my question is, and there was some discussion about getting in, using the paradigm to get in, and using, aligning your skills with whatever the masculine paradigm is, and then changing it from inside. So my belief is that as a feminine consciousness is a collaborative consciousness, it's not hierarchical, right? So what do you think, and what would you suggest we do as women to try and change the culture internally, because we're still even couching our conversation in hierarchy. How do we get to the top, So that's my observation and my question.
So there's a couple of things that I think are important. First of all is that it's not all about going to the top. It's about your ideas being heard. Particularly in some disciplines, what you want to see is you have the best way to solve a problem, and how sad is it when you're trying to present it and it's squished over and over again. That's in the case of science, engineering, and technology. That's the reason why they're wanting to leave. It's not necessarily because their careers are stalled, it's because their ideas are not being valued. And sometimes it results into this virtuous circle that your ideas are recognized, you get the credit, and your advancement happens. But when you don't even have the chance to put the ideas. There's a couple of things that women I'm going to point out. First of all, the research indicates that we women are not sponsoring other women.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that we women perceive that sponsoring other women, is risky. So they're going, the chances of them making it and how it's going to make me look when they fail is a big worry of us. We think that if we sponsor a woman and the woman fails, it's going to look really bad. But if I sponsor a mainstream candidate, then it's not so bad. And then the other thing is that women are, this is from the sponsoring point of view, but also from the potential protege point of view. We don't believe that women have power to support us. So we look for sponsors. Even when we're looking for sponsors, we will look for a male. And we found that this disconnect is what really is impairing the ability for women to forge these great relationships among themselves. The second thing is that when it comes to executive presence, and there's 3 dimensions that our research highlighted. Gravitas is 62%, communications is 32%, and your appearance is 6%. Appearance being a little bit deceiving because it's a deal maker, but it's not a deal maker, but it's a deal breaker. Meaning if your appearance is distracting, people will have a hard time getting past that, particularly women judging other women. So the point here is that even when it comes to executive presence and how we develop our presence, even giving us feedback, women don't get more feedback from female bosses than they get from male bosses. In fact, they get less. So the point here is that there's a lot of things that women can do in terms of in their role as leaders that could be incredibly game-changing for other women.
Good. How about a question over here?
Yes, I had a question about making reference to the Price Waterhouse versus Hopkins. Happened way back in the 80s. There was a woman who was seeking to become partner, was passed over because they thought she didn't behave the way a woman should. She was more aggressive. She was more straight in the eye, shoulders, as you said earlier. What are your suggestions for women like her, maybe me, who kind of have that spectrum of issues that now I have to deal with maybe a man who is this tall and I have to tell him on feedback review?
That's a great question. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Not good news.
Great. Wait a minute. I just want to give a round of applause for standing up and like surfacing something a lot of us face. That is the right question to ask. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm sure everyone here has heard a lot about this whole, likability versus competence research thing. But I'll just tell you a couple of very practical things in my own career because I feel like I'm constantly flim-flamming between the two. So entertainingly, in the last couple of weeks, I got in the same very nice review, all sorts of compliments about how collegial and warm and caring I am, and that I can be kind of scary. When I get intense about a deadline, I'm like, scary? I'm like, okay. And so, but the other thing is, I think it is this issue about asking yourself, can you have a range of behavior? Coming from Wall Street here has been a really eye-opening experience. I will tell you, I would never have worn this outfit ever on Wall Street, not once, right? No dresses, ever, in my entire career. So because you were really, you felt like you couldn't be heard unless you spoke in a very declarative, low, loud voice. And a few years ago, an executive communications person said to me, Sharon, you need to be more charming. I'm like, what? Man. And then I stopped and I thought, oh my God. He said something to me, and I think my mother. Oh my God, I love my mother, but I've spent my whole career doing, trying to do things that I felt she wasn't allowed to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I should throw out the half of the behavior spectrum that is actually very charming and warm and pulls people in a very natural way. And so I have had to think really hard about when is it okay to be intense, to the point of maybe even of scary, and when is it okay to be the person I'd like to be with my friends, which is warm and encouraging and welcoming. So that's my own little bit.
At the core of executive presence is authenticity. You can't fake it. So you have to be who you are. And the moment you stop apologizing for who you are and you come and you own the place, and you act like you own the place, things change. I mean, I've seen, we had the opportunity to interview women leaders who were perhaps more assertive. Some of them, especially there's biases that our research indicates for African American women, for Asian women, and for Hispanic women that are brutal. I move my hands and, the emotional Latina, right? And for an African American woman, this is documented in our research, pounding the table, being assertive, the angry black, right? So and for the Asian women is because you don't assert yourself strongly. doesn't have it. It's really the leadership too quiet, really. So we have to be mindful. So we have to be mindful that at some point in our careers we just say, you know what? This is who it is. I have an accent, I have dark skin, I am over 50. 50. So, and this is who I am. And the part of what you exude and you bring to the table, if nothing else, I'm telling you, you'll be a happier executive than you would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
Let's take another couple. Can we go here and then we'll go in the back? Yes.
Allison Johnson talked to us about her regret when she was younger. What would you tell your younger self? She talked about finding your own voice. So I wanted to ask each of the women there, what is the process in finding your own voice? And what's your story in finding your own voice?
You want to start?
Sure. I think so many women are so afraid of not being perfect, so that they just play everything so safe. And so I think there was a night where I read a quote online when I was first incubating the idea of this conference, when I really had that itty bitty shitty committee working full time in my head. And I read this quote that said, don't ask who's gonna let you, but ask who's gonna stop you. And I think too many women are afraid of being who they are, that someone else is gonna not like them or not respond well to them. And so I think part of finding your voice, it's kind of like in order to be a writer, you have to write. And so in order to find your own voice, you have to use it, exercise it. That might be blogging, that might be doing volunteer work, that might be mentoring someone. But find when you feel like you are in your zone and you are gratified and people are responding to you and you lose track of time. And that's the best advice I can give you, is that as soon as I started to give myself permission to do what I loved and what I felt passionate about, the entire world opened up for me. And don't be afraid. Like, there's another quote about how, and I really relate to this as a people pleaser, I used to walk into a room and wonder if people liked me, and you want to get to the place where you walk into a room and wonder if you like those people.
That's right. Beautiful. It helped hitting 40 for me. I stopped really caring.
Totally. It's the best thing about aging.
It's the best thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The wrinkles is one, but then not really caring if they like me. It's okay. And don't ever apologize. I really love that. Don't ever apologize for yourself. Okay, let's go in the back.
My name's Nikia Boya-Sigiller. I'm a business school professor, and I was on the faculty at San Jose State for 10 years, and then for 17 years. Then 10 years I've been a dean at a school in Istanbul, Turkey, which is my home country. My question is this: are universities doing enough to prepare women for the business world? And I'll start by asking Sharon that, since you mentioned that you're teaching at Stanford on occasion. And the reason I'm asking, too, is that as a professor, and in a retooling year, this is my sabbatical year, I'm thinking of starting a class again on women in management, which we had in the 70s when I was in business school, and then it became very much out of the vogue because, of course, we didn't want women in ghettos. We didn't want separate classes for women. We said, you know, the world is our oyster, go forth. But I'm sensing that maybe as education institutions, we're not preparing women for many of the challenges they're going to be facing. And so I'm wondering what your sense is, and I'd love to hear, would it have helped when you were at school to have sessions like this, talking about challenges women are going to be facing in the... But I'd love to hear, what do you think, Sharon?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think schools, universities have a unique privilege to make this conversation safe and to kind of curate them in a way that people can voice their questions and get them answered and bring in experts, practitioners, whatever you. So I think, yes, wholeheartedly. I actually got involved both at Stanford and at Harvard creating initiatives to just have groups like this where students could talk to graduate students or professors and just make this conversation happen, and to make it happen with guys. And I will leave you with the course that launched our book was a course that a professor at Stanford Business School had started in the 70s. It got canceled for a while, and then it came back in the 90s because of the sterile gender revolution thing. And because without a course like this, the conversations were not happening. The cool thing that has happened over the 10 years is that course went from being something like 20% guys to almost half guys today, and it's a big class. The other cool thing I would point to, I encourage all of you to go look on the web for something called the Man-Ambassadors. The Man-Ambassadors are this lovely group of 20-something-year-old guys at Harvard Business School who decided they were tired of being on the wrong side of this, making the world fair thing. And so they're men who've decided that they really want to be encouraging other guys not to kind of groan and leave the room when diversity and inclusion and, playing fair ball with the girls is discussed. And they are making a really big difference. They're having, I think, a big conference this spring, and it's a really neat thing. So encouraging the guys to be part of the conversation and assuming they want what we want, which is a more equal world.
Nice.
And teaching the women how to play golf.
I cannot play golf. I tried a lot, I tell you. Maybe by the time I'm 60.
Let's go to the back. Do you mind standing? Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Maureen Xavier, and Noni, this is directly a question for you, but maybe applies to all of you. I've heard sponsorship thrown around a lot today, and I'm wondering what your definition of sponsorship is. What are the responsibilities of both the sponsor and the sponsee?
Thank you.
So a couple of things. First of all, sponsorship relationships are a two-way street. You benefit your protege as much as your protege gives you back. In other words, for it to be beneficial, it's not like mentoring where I have to give time for my mentee because I'm such a nice person. No, this is an important point because it's a selfish relationship. And a lot of women tell me that, oh my God, I don't have time to sponsor. Then it's mentoring. Because if it's truly sponsor, the person you're going to sponsor is going to give you something back. Let me give you some examples. As a sponsor, I have to advance your career, advance your ideas, put my name and political chips on the table for you. If I'm not doing that, I'm not a sponsor. I'm a great mentor. If I'm just talking how great she is, and that's not true. So as a protege, I have to start with a yes, lead with a yes, enhance the brand of your sponsor. Tell people how great your sponsor is. You have to also make sure that you are delivering 120%. It's an earned relationship. You don't go ask for a sponsorship. You have to earn it. And also, the other thing is that you have to be trustworthy. So the person has to be able to rely on you. So this happens organically. You don't just say, okay, from now on, we're going to be sponsor and protege. Mentoring relationships are based on the fact that I can come in and I can consult you about, coming back from work, what should I do, career. That's what mentors do. I sponsor because now you, as my protege, will look after me. If there's something wrong going in my organization, you're going to come and tell me. If I need help for that special project, you're going to make sure that I can count on you. So it's mutually beneficial. So we have a very strict definition. And unless you are able, as a sponsor, I'll give you visibility. I'll make sure my peers see you. I'll make sure that when you're making a mistake, I'll give you air cover. So it's a far more intense relationship, but it's selfish. There's something in it for me.
So can mentorship lead to sponsorship?
Absolutely, absolutely. But the sponsor has to have a direct line of sight to your work and the ability to influence and make difference for you. So if you have a wonderful mentor who's somewhere in another group that never has the power to do that, it's a great mentor.
And does every woman need a sponsor?
Well, yes. Well, the thing is that it's never too early to build a sponsorship relationship because it's not only for advancement. It could be coming back from a maternity leave, that you're just, you're coming back and you need a good sponsor to make room and say, okay, it's okay to leave at 3. It's okay to do these kinds of things. It's also because you want to learn finance and you're in manufacturing. And people go like, who do you know? No, she knows, put her there. It's because it's all those different things. It's not only about going up.
Nice, that's great. Other questions?
What do you say to women, which means all of us, in terms of accepting other women in leadership? Because clearly, I'm not the typical face. I'm not the typical voice. and I'm not the typical stance. So, and my behavior is different. So what do you say to us all women in terms of accepting somebody who comes in different, with a different set of rules, and in terms of your own ability to even allow her in? Because I think we could be our own worst enemies.
So I just going to jump in really quickly because I'm constantly arguing with my husband about that, who actually thinks that women are their own best worst enemies. And I say yes and no, because I feel like I've seen both. I stayed at Goldman Sachs for 16 years because I had the best band of sisters you could pray for in the world, who were great sponsors and mentors, and they were just, and friends, and they've remained that. That said, I had my own comeuppance on this while I was writing my book. I had actually been asked to do something for Hillary Clinton, and I was hemming and hawing Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, this all sort of thing. And I interviewed a CEO who was telling me that the women on his team, he worked at a big entertainment company, were much harder on senior women than the guys. That the guys would, say, yeah, she's a little difficult, but she's super smart, you should hire her or promote her. And the female subordinates would say, well, I don't know if she has it. She went to good schools, but they would just hem and haw. And at that moment, it dawned on me that my challenge, getting 100% behind Hillary Clinton, despite being all about women's leadership, was I didn't know what to look for. And neither did any of those women this man was describing, that we're just way too picky because we don't know what to pick. Wow. And so this epiphany, I try to hold on to, which is, in a world without enough female leaders, we have to encourage ourselves to think broad and imagine what this could look like, and to welcome all these different styles, because that's what it's going to take.
Wow.
Great answer. Other questions?
You bring up Hillary Clinton, and I lived in England under Maggie Thatcher years. And they called her in England Ronald Reagan in pants. I mean, in a dress, sorry. Well, he might have worn a dress too, I don't know. But she was Ronald Reagan in a dress. And I wonder if there's some things you might say about, even if we get a female president, about setting the proper expectations for women, whether it's a woman CEO or a woman president or whatever, and they end up Maggie Thatcher. There's nothing, female woman helping at all. I mean, they tear apart a country. You know what I'm saying? So just because she's got a vagina, be careful about the expectations. I know so many young women who've been so disillusioned by women in leadership because they're not women in these women's minds or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the benefit of diversity is diversity. You don't want to bring women into the room and then want them to be something other than what they are. And we're all different. Just because we're female doesn't mean we're all going to have the same reactions or think the same things are funny or have the same politics. So just like we're tasking the men to get uncomfortable by allowing our otherness in, we have to let our own otherness in amongst the sisterhood. There's not one way to be female. And what you were just saying, Sharon, really struck a good nerve in me, because I've heard a lot that men will facilitate connections in their circle for all sorts of things without giving it a second thought. It's like, oh, you want to meet Barbara? Good luck, you two. And women will think, what if they don't get along? Is it going to reflect poorly on me? What if she doesn't follow up? So they don't do it. And so sometimes the way men do things, there's some wisdom there. And so I've started to, anytime someone wants to meet someone, anytime I think something good could come of it, I'll introduce people and then just take yourself out of the equation. And no one is going to judge you of the outcome of that. And you will have facilitated more connections. And so I think we have to just be open to the fact that we're not all the same just because we're female.
Amen to that.
Amen to that.
All right, we're almost done. We have about 5 minutes. Any burning questions before I go back to the panel? Yes, and we'll just ask the answer to be quick.
This is for Noni. Actually, I have a repeat of something you said earlier. I wanted to get those 3 top readouts of what people are expecting for your exec presence. You said communications number 2, appearance number 3, but what was number 1?
Gravitas.
Oh,
Gravitas is 62%.
Okay.
What is it?
So gravitas.
What does it look like?
Gravitas is acting like a leader. Communications is sounding like, acting like, and I'll give you a little bit of more granularities. Number 2, communications is sounding like a leader, and of course, appearance is looking like a leader.
Okay.
So the top attributes of gravitas are things like displaying grace under fire, speaking truth to power. You know, the moments that change careers because someone was courageous enough to say the truth when nobody could. Decisiveness.
Okay.
It's also, reputation was in there. People believe that your reputation will precede you and people will judge you or expect or hear your message differently based on what they know about you.
Okay, and then the second part of that question was, where can we find more information on this? Because it sounds like you've done enough research that you can refer us to.
Absolutely, talentinnovation.org, and you can find the research pieces. There's one executive presence, and there's one for multicultural, which breaks it down by the challenges that we face as women of color, people of color, actually.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just do one little
super duper quick? Yeah. Let's.
I appreciated you talking about the difference in cultures and how things are read out. I actually did a 360 recently, and you mentioned about African Americans, et cetera. Confidence is one of those excellent examples. For white males, confidence is confidence. For white females, confidence becomes the B word. But for people of color, confidence becomes arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. A round of applause for this fantastic panel. Noni, Sharon, Kat.
Amy.
Yeah.
Amy.
Thank you. All right, thanks.